Welcome to Blackbird Writers presents author interviews. Today, I get the opportunity to chat with Colleen Winter, who is a Canadian speculative thriller author, and she lives in Canada. Not a day goes by when she's not moving words around or deleting entire paragraphs to make what she's writing into the most concise, powerful piece it can be. Both in her work as a communications consultant in Ontario, in the Ontario electrical industry, and as a fiction writer, it's always been her joy and challenge to write words that inspire, educate, and motivate her readers. Her work encompasses almost all elements of writing: social media, video scripts, website content, full-length novels, or flash fiction. And each discipline brings its own challenges and rewards. Welcome, Colleen.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
It is so great to talk to you about your series today. So I've got the first two books here, and I just finished the Disruptors, the second one.
Right.
And I was reading your bio on your website. So you've had a long career working for the Ontario electric industry, and I suppose that's the genesis for this speculative fiction.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm an electrical engineer by training, and so even though I've spent a lot of time in the industry and working there for quite a few years, I still find it really fascinating. And it's also, electricity sort of undermines our entire society, and without it, we are often lost. I mean, anybody who's ever been in a power outage understands how completely reliant we are on it. And but I think we also take it for granted. So there was that piece in terms of I wanted to sort of delve into that a little bit, to sort of the fact that it's such a powerful force in our lives that we're not really aware of. And then at the same time, and back in the early 90s, I was sort of one of the first people who, not first, but in the early stages when people were getting a lot of food allergies and a lot of food intolerances, which is quite common now.
Right.
But at the time, doctors didn't really understand it. And so a lot of people were telling me it was all in my head and that it didn't exist. And so I kind of wanted to take those two ideas and sort of mesh them together and see where they intersected. And that's kind of how the whole idea for the series came about.
Oh, wow. So that seems like that's your inspiration. Why then are you the best person to write these books?
Well, I think because I have because I believe so passionately in it. I think it's a lot of people, as soon as you mention electricity, they just kind of roll their eyes and their eyes glaze over. But for me, it's such an amazing thing, and we don't fully understand it. And that's, I think, where humanity and humans really run into problems, is when we start messing with things that we don't fully understand. And it's happened so many times in the past with all sorts of technologies or biological inventions that have in the end run into problems. And so that's why I really wanted to delve into that, because the gatherer, and we'll get into this I think in the next question, but because the gatherer creates harm at the same time as it delivers energy, I wanted to talk about that intersection and how we're often not willing to give up what we've invented, even though we know it's causing harm. And that's why, and I've always been fascinated in that. And that's why I wanted to write the books.
Yeah, that's what's, I think, very fascinating about the books. So The Gatherer is the first book. And in this book, Storm Freeman's idea for a cleaner form of energy has already been implemented. And so explain a little bit about what The Gatherer does, and then kind of set the story for readers.
Absolutely. So The Gatherer is what it sounds like. Is it essentially gathers energy from the world around it, and it delivers free energy to the world. And it kind of, at the beginning, even before the book started, it has sort of ushered in this era of decadence and luxury, because it sort of solves a lot of the carbon emission problems and a lot of the environmental degradation around energy sources that we have now. Mm-hmm. And it solves all that. So Storm Freeman, who's the inventor, she is sort of heralded as a savior, and that she has brought this wonderful new era to the world. But then, of course, as with everything, and because it is a technology gone wrong book, it also delivers a sickness. So it also draws energy. As it's drawing energy from everything around it, it also draws energy from people and from plants, and kind of upsets the balance of the earth. Well, I mean, on a very, very micro level. And so Storm Freeman herself gets sick as well. As she's developing this invention, she gets sick and has to retreat from society, because part of the sickness is that you can't be around electricity. You can't be around any electromagnetic fields. And this is a real thing. It's called electromagnetic sensitivity. And there are people in our society now who have it and actually can't live in our cities, and who have to go out and live very far from civilization because they can't be near any fields. And so this is kind of where the book begins. So Storm has had to retreat from society. She's kind of in hiding, trying to get better. But then she also finds out that the Gatherer is now creating even larger damage and larger degradation. So she has to make that decision. So does she stay in hiding, or does she come back and try and fix what she's done?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because way back when I was pregnant with my first child, with my daughter, I was researching, there was a lot of stuff out there about the big power lines, and those big giant towers with, you drive under them and you can hear them buzzing.
Yes.
And the fields that they generate, and how, I think there was a lot of worry at that time about how that could be cancer causing, or, yeah. And I didn't.
Yeah. And there's been a lot of cases around those high voltage power lines, in terms of people who are living underneath them, and the health problems they've had because of that. I think that is actually fairly well documented, and there have been court cases around that.
Yeah. So the Disruptors, the second book in the series, there's a character, Maria, oh gosh, what's her last name? Kowalski. I was going to say that. She is looking for Storm, who has gone into hiding. And so explain a little bit about what's happening in book 2 now.
So book 2, so in the first book, they don't want to give it all away, but
right.
Book, yeah, they're essentially, Maria comes to find Storm, and they're trying to together, they're trying to sort of stop the Gatherer and the powers that be. But what has happened in the second book is that a new player has come onto the scene, and the government has gotten involved, because energy is power in our world, right? You see that with oil and gas industry. So much of our world conflict is centered around energy. And so again, of course, the Canadian government has gotten involved, and the military has gotten involved. And so Storm and Maria are trying to stop it. But of course, the government and the military, they want to keep this thing going, because it has raised them to a level of influence and power that they've never had before.
And the character Maria is a real badass. She was a special forces agent in the first book, and this character evolves in some kind of unexpected ways. I liked her a lot.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yes, it's always funny to see who identifies with which characters, right? Yeah. Some people really like Storm, and then other people are much more all about Maria. People really like Maria because she gets stuff done, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's also ex-military, and so she had to a lot of the research I did around that was because I don't have a military background, is I talked to different people. I have a friend, her husband is a sort of special forces guy within the Ontario Provincial Police. So in exchange for, I think, some headshots and some professional photos that I did for him, he let me, pick his brain for an hour on, what you do when you're trying to, when there wasn't a kidnapping, but if there's a kidnapping in a house, how do you approach that house? And how do you, how would you stand if you're waiting for somebody to attack you? And how do you carry your gun? And then I also talked to a special former Secret Service agent who actually met at Thriller Fest, which is where we met.
Right.
And he was talking to me about, so if you're riding in a parade, it's not called a parade, cavalcade maybe, of cars, and they're providing security. So who gets out of the car first? What happens when you get there? When does the important person come out of the car? All the sort of little details like that I needed to find out about. And then at another writing class, I had run into a guy who essentially was in charge of all the weapons for the Canadian military. And he just loved authors. So he was willing to talk to you about any questions you had. So through all that, and just talking to them, I was really able to fill out Maria's character and what would her capabilities be, but also what would her weaknesses be, right? And she ends up being, very, I mean, the stories, or the series, almost has two main characters, Storm and Maria, and depending on who you like, that's who you think is the main character. But yeah, she was very, very fun to write, actually.
Yeah, I can see why. I do like that she's motivated.
Yeah, she's very motivated. Yeah, Storm is very cerebral because she's the inventor. She's sort of the trying to make the world a better place. But Maria's, things are much more straightforward for her. She's about, making decisions and taking action. And yeah, that's always, and of course, there's always a tension between the two of them, right?
Right.
And because, Maria often, impulsively, charges into things without necessarily thinking properly. So there's that tension between the two of them as well.
Yeah. So between the two of them, well, they're both sort of on the same page where, the gatherers are concerned, because of the illnesses and all of that, things need to be shut down. But there's a new villain has sort of emerged.
Yes. So he is, I call him Stanton in the books, but he's actually General Stanton. So he is Maria's former commander, and she's actually AWOL. So that is part of the problem. She was initially, in the first book, was sent off to, find out what was really going on with the Gatherer. So there's always sort of this pressure on her that she's being pursued. That is always part of it, because she's, gone outside the chain of command. But Stanton, again, he kind of embodies the whole power structure in terms of wanting to keep this gatherer going. And, it's been distributed throughout the entire world. So Canada now has this, which I thought was really funny, has this influence in the world like it's never had before, right? Like Canada never thinks, nobody ever thinks Canada is like the important enforcer in the world, right? So it's kind of fun to put Canada in that position, for it to actually be, hey, we're at the top rung of the world order. And so anyways, that has also raised Stanton's star as well. So he wants to keep that, right? So he is very bound and determined to keep the Gatherer production going. So that's where, and Storm has lost control of it because she was sick and she left the city and kind of left society for a while. Mm-hmm. She has actually lost control of the corporation that is doing all this. And so that kind of puts them outside of the system and makes it harder for them to stop it.
Yeah, definitely. So for the viewers, I think I want to clarify a little bit, because it sounds a little bit like sci-fi,
right?
But it's really such, it was a total thrill ride for me, because you have the action and the pacing, and it's, there's constantly, they're looking over their shoulders and running. And I feel like, there's that sci-fi element. But can you explain maybe the difference between sci-fi and spec fiction?
Yeah, and it's always very hard to categorize a book, and I think that this is more of a speculative thriller than it is for sci-fi, because the sci-fi element is very, very small. The only sci-fi element is the Gatherer itself, the fact that it does not exist in our world. Yeah. So it's a very, very near future speculative thriller. And that's why I love to write speculative fiction, is because it's just kind of over the horizon, right? You can kind of take a snapshot of where we are today and take an element of it and project that into the future and say, okay, what would that be like? What would happen?
Yeah.
And because I'm so kind of entrenched in the energy industry, and I find it such a, it has the potential for great things and for horrible things, that I really wanted to say, okay, so where is all this going with what feels like our society's insatiable need for energy,
Yeah. And is there a message or like a warning that you're trying to convey with these books?
Well, there's two actually. One of them has to do with the electromagnetic sensitivity we were talking about earlier, and the fact that so we're surrounded by electromagnetic fields in our entire lives, right? It doesn't matter if it's a cell phone tower or a Wi-Fi network or power lines. It's everywhere. And to date, nobody really seems to think that's a problem. So, and a lot of people have said after they've read the books, they're like, I now look at, a transformer station, which is like one of those little green boxes on your front lawn,
Yeah.
in an entirely different way, right? Or I see a cell phone tower and I have an entirely different reaction to it than I used to. And so that's one thing I want people to start thinking about is like, is it really fine for us to be surrounded by these fields all the time?
Yeah.
And the other thing I wanted to talk about was also what I mentioned earlier was this need for our society, just for this, our appetite for energy is always growing, and we're always seem to need more and more things. And where is it going to stop? Like at what point is this kind of the degradation that we have to do in order to get this energy? When is it going to outweigh the benefits of this technology and all these inventions that we've created?
Yeah. I think it's a really important discussion.
Absolutely. And not one that it doesn't happen that often, to be honest. It's always
Right.
more, well, how can we do more? How can we get more? How can we, maybe change from, oil and gas to, renewable energy? But it's not about ever reducing how much we're using. It's all just about changing how we can get more, right?
Like you
So,
said, we take so much for granted.
so much. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Mhm. So Storm is the third book in the series, and that just came out in May, right?
Yes, May 24th.
Do you have a
I have
copy?
a copy of it right here. There we go.
Yay.
That's a Storm, yeah. So yeah, just over 2 weeks ago it came out, which was very exciting.
I can't wait to read it. Can you give us a taste of what's coming in book 3 without giving too much away?
Absolutely, yes. So I mean, Storm and Maria essentially have one final chance to get rid of the gatherer. I mean, things obviously are escalating. The damage from the gatherer is increasing. Storm is still having a lot of health issues, and they're up against more obstacles, which it's hard not to talk about without giving stuff away. But yeah, so this one is in my opinion the strongest of the three. It takes off with what somebody called it, like a flash of lightning, and then it just goes. And I'm really happy with this one. So I'm very excited that this is sort of the culmination of the series in this final book.
Oh, very exciting.
Yeah.
So what's next? Are you working on another series or more books?
Well, that's funny.
I know it's hard to talk about it because your book just came out.
I know. Well, and I always find that ironic too, because it's almost as soon as you finish the first one, or the last one, as soon as you announce that you're done, people are always like, "Oh, well, what's next?" Like you've got this sort of what you think is a huge accomplishment, and then all of a sudden, they're like, it's like it didn't happen. It's just like, well, what's next on this? So yes, I do have some ideas. I have started writing the next one. At this point, I think it's a standalone, but the problem is when I started the Gatherer series, I thought it was a standalone as well. So I seem to have a tendency to write these stories that can move into series fairly easily. So it may be a series, but this point, I think it's a standalone.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a literary hero or a mentor who has inspired you to write?
I do actually. So when I was growing up, I was raised on Margaret Atwood's stories. And so she writes a lot of dystopian stuff, a lot of very feminist, strong female character, sort of grappling with a lot of the issues of today. And I always would, wanted to write like her or stuff like her. And so I'm not saying I have come anywhere close to achieving that, but yes, certainly she has been someone. I've read all her stuff. She wrote a short story a long time ago that I read, and it's one of those stories that has just stuck with me for decades. And it's about two girls, young girls. I think they're at a summer camp, and they're They go off, I think, to go to the bathroom in the woods. And then one of them goes behind a tree to do her business. And then she just disappears. And then they never see the girl again. And of course, you know, the authorities are called, they drag the lake, and this girl they just never find her. And I spend a lot of time in the woods myself. And so that story always, you know, it's just stuck with me, just the creepiness of it and just the not knowing.
What's it called? Do you know?
Oh, I can't even
wanna-
remember the name of it. But
Want to write it down. So, okay.
yes, it's a great story. It's probably in one of her wilderness. It's probably in the wilderness tips book of hers. But I can't remember the specific name. But anyway, but just her ability to do that, to have such a powerful response in a story, has always, just made me want to write that kind of powerful story.
Yeah, that's great. Where can readers find you or your books if they want to reach out?
Well, they're pretty much available. Certainly the first two are available everywhere. You can get them on Amazon or at independent bookstores and in pretty much every ebook format there is. And then the Storm just came out, so it's available in print everywhere, but only in Kindle right now, ebook. And in about 2 months, it'll be out in all formats in ebook. So it's available just about everywhere.
And what's your website?
Oh, it's ColleenWinter.ca.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to reading Storm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for reading them. It's always great to have people, you know, start to think about these things and just to enjoy the ride, really. So thanks again.
Thank you.
All right.